He kissed her like the war might take them both. Vivian Leigh trembling, Clark Gable holding on tight. This is your invitation back to Hollywood's most romance-fueled scenes. 18 classic cinematic memories where the love felt real and still does today. Gone with the Wind, 1939, Clark Gable and Vivian Leigh. In 1939, as the Great Depression waned and war clouds gathered overseas, Hollywood offered an escape, a 4-hour Technicolor fever dream called Gone with the Wind. Produced by David O. Selznick, it was billed as the most ambitious film ever made. But behind the velvet curtains of Tara and the swirling ball gowns lay something far messier. Two stars, both brilliant and bruised, acting out a love story that burned too hot to last. The scene is pure electricity. Scarlett O'Hara, fiery and unrepentant, spars with Rhett Butler at the foot of a grand staircase. He leans in, half smirking, as she fumbles for control. "You should be kissed," he tells her. And often, and by someone who knows how. The camera holds. She gasps, stunned. And in that breathless moment, the line became one of the most seductive in cinema history. But off-screen, things weren't so romantic. Vivian Leigh, brilliant and haunting as Scarlett, was already showing signs of what those closest to her would later call restless storms of the mind. She fought through the shoot with obsessive perfectionism, sometimes unraveling between takes. The crew whispered about her mood swings. Others simply said she worked too hard and paid for it with her health. And Clark Gable? He looked like the perfect Rhett, but he carried his own shadow. Known as the King of Hollywood, Gable couldn't stay away from the bottle. Studio executives covered for him, but those on set saw the toll. His charm flickered, his eyes sometimes dulled. Some said he was mourning his second wife, who had recently died in a plane crash, a grief that never quite left his posture. Still, when Gable kissed Leigh on that sweeping staircase, none of it showed. Or maybe all of it did. The tension, the pain, the pride, it lived in that kiss. The audience felt it. They still do. Ironically, Gone with the Wind was about a love that couldn't survive its own fire, and so were the people who brought it to life. The scene promised a kiss that could heal everything, but in the end, it was just another beautiful illusion Hollywood taught us to believe in. Casablanca, 1942, Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. In 1942, as the world trembled under the weight of war, Hollywood lit a single match. Casablanca. Produced by Warner Brothers at the height of America's entry into World War II, the film was never meant to be immortal. But what began as a modest studio picture turned into one of the most poignant love stories cinema has ever known. Not just for what was said, but for everything that had to remain unsaid. The scene is simple. A fog-drenched airstrip, the hum of a waiting plane, and two people, Rick and Ilsa, standing on the edge of goodbye. It's not passion that burns between them. It's restraint. It's sacrifice. He holds her arms as if trying to memorize her shape. She stares at him like she's already mourning the moment. And when he says it, "Here's looking at you, kid," it's not a catchphrase. It's an obituary for everything they could have been. But that scene didn't just sting on screen. It echoed off it, too. Rumors swirled for decades that Bogart and Bergman carried a flicker of that on-screen tension into real life. They didn't rehearse the ending because no one knew it, not even the actors. The script was rewritten daily, and by the time they filmed the final goodbye, both stars were working off instinct. That wasn't acting, that was surrender. And then there was the irony. Bogart, the hard-boiled leading man who rarely got the girl, finally had her, only to let her go. Off-camera, his marriage to Mayo Method was unraveling amid allegations of violence and drinking. On camera, he embodied the noble man who put love aside for something bigger. He looked like a hero, even as his real life teetered behind the scenes. Audiences left the theaters in silence, not because they didn't feel, but because they felt too much. The war was real. Sacrifice was real. and Casablanca gave them a romance that understood that not all great loves are meant to last. Rick let Ilsa go, not because he didn't love her, but because he did, and in doing so, he gave Hollywood its most perfect, most painful goodbye. An Affair to Remember, 1957, Cary Grant and Deborah Kerr. In 1957, as America slid into its post-war dream of perfect homes and polite restraint, An Affair to Remember dared to ask a question that still lingers in quiet corners of the heart. What if the love of your life returned, but you no longer recognized them? Produced by 20th Century Fox, the film was wrapped in elegance, shot in CinemaScope, dressed in soft pastels and Manhattan skyline views, but its most unforgettable moment came not from glamour, but from absence. The final scene, Cary Grant enters a woman's modest New York apartment. She's seated, visibly frail, her smile hiding something deeper. And then he sees the painting, the one she had promised to buy. And in that moment, everything crashes into place. The accident, the silence, the unanswered promise to meet at the top of the Empire State Building. His voice breaks. Why didn't you tell me? And with that, one of Hollywood's most gutting reunions unfolds, not in a kiss, but in a revelation. What audiences didn't know was that both stars were carrying their own invisible burdens. Deborah Kerr, cast for her sophistication and quiet intensity, was navigating a long-distance marriage and a career full of roles that required emotional grace without ever breaking the mold. She delivered every line with aching control, but off-screen, some say she was growing weary of playing women who swallowed their own longing. As for Cary Grant, the man with the cleft chin and unshakable composure, he was approaching his mid-50s and privately wrestling with years of personal loss and alleged dependency on tranquilizers. By the time this film was released, his Hollywood smile had begun to feel like armor, polished on the outside, hollow just beneath. And yet, together, they made something eternal. The heartbreak in that final scene didn't need violins or speeches. It lived in the pause, the way she averted her eyes, the way he stared, stunned, at a woman who never stopped loving him, even when her body wouldn't let her climb to meet him. In a genre built on grand gestures, An Affair to Remember reminded us that real romance is quieter. Sometimes it doesn't shout, it waits, and it hurts. And sometimes love shows up again, just not the way we expected. The Philadelphia Story, 1940. Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn. In 1940, Katharine Hepburn was box office poison, or so the press claimed. Her last few films had flopped, her confidence was rattled, and Hollywood, as it often does, was ready to forget. So she made a bold move. She bought the rights to a Broadway play, The Philadelphia Story, and handpicked Cary Grant to be her co-star. What followed wasn't just a comeback, it was a cinematic redemption arc disguised as a screwball comedy. The scene that endures isn't flashy. There's no kiss, no rain-soaked embrace, just two ex-lovers standing under the morning sun, a wedding derailed, reputations bruised, and futures uncertain. Tracy Lord, elegant and proud, is reeling from a whirlwind of missteps. Dexter, her ex-husband, watches quietly as she attempts to save face in front of friends and family. And then he steps forward, calm, unhurried, and says the words that change everything. I hope to make it up to you by going through with it now, as originally and most beautifully planned. Her face freezes. The guests gasp. And in that breathless pause, we see the moment Tracy realizes she was always meant to marry the man who knew her best, flaws and all. Off-screen, their dynamic was just as layered. Grant, ever the gentleman on camera, was battling his own inner chaos. Colleagues noted how he wrestled with trust and identity, reportedly turning to various spiritual movements in search of peace. Hepburn, meanwhile, had learned to keep her emotions armored, some say as protection after years of Hollywood rejection and whispered rumors about her personal life. Yet on screen, they met in the middle. Witty, electric, almost too smart for the room. Their chemistry wasn't the feverish kind, It was sharper, cooler, like two minds fencing with velvet-tipped swords. That final scene landed not because of fireworks, but because of grace. It showed that real love doesn't always come crashing in. Sometimes, it waits quietly until you're finally ready to see it. For Hepburn, the Philadelphia story revived her career. For Grant, it revealed a tenderness behind the charm. And for audiences, it proved that even after heartbreak, second chances can still arrive, dressed in morning light and tied with wit instead of roses. It happened. One night, 1934, Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. In 1934, the country was still clawing its way out of the Great Depression, and love, especially on screen, was either a fantasy for the rich or a joke for the desperate. It Happened One Night changed that. It gave audiences something rare, a romance that felt both scrappy and real, a runaway heiress, a broke reporter, one thin blanket strung between two twin beds, and somewhere along a dusty roadside, love quietly took root. The most unforgettable moment comes not with a kiss, but with a confession. Late in the film, Gable's character, the rough-edged, wisecracking Peter, stands before the bride's father, and for once drops the act. "Yes, I love her," he admits, almost against his will, "but don't hold that against me. I'm a little screwy myself." No swelling violins, no grand speeches. Just a man, wounded and proud, finally saying what he can't keep inside. Off-screen, the production was just as mismatched. Claudette Colbert didn't want the role. She'd already labeled the project a flop and told friends she only agreed because it would be over quickly. Gable, too, arrived on loan from MGM, a punishment, some said, for being too difficult. He drank heavily between takes. She reportedly stormed off set, and yet, somehow, their tension created magic. The friction between them wasn't smoothed out. It was captured moment by moment, frame by frame. When it premiered, no one expected it to last. But it swept the Oscars. Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, and 3 more. It was the first film to ever do it. Suddenly, Colbert, who had all but packed her bags, was Hollywood's golden girl. And Gable? He'd cemented his place as the rugged heartthrob who could play both cad and romantic with a single glance. Decades later, that blanket between the beds still says more than most love scenes. The restraint, the curiosity, the slow burn of two people who hate each other until they don't. It happened. One night taught us that love isn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, somewhere between sarcasm and silence, and stays for good. From Here to Eternity, 1953, Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr. In 1953, Hollywood still wore a mask of decency, a pearl-clutched smile hiding the hunger beneath. But From Here to Eternity cracked the surface. It didn't whisper about desire. It let it crash like a wave, soaking the screen in salt water and scandal. The moment is burned into the memory of cinema, a lonely stretch of Hawaiian beach, waves breaking loud enough to drown out regret. Burt Lancaster's Sergeant Warden leans into Deborah Kerr's Karen Holmes, and suddenly they're tangled in the surf, lips locked, limbs entwined, her white swimsuit stark against volcanic sand. It's not just a kiss, it's a rebellion. She's the commanding officer's wife. He's the soldier risking everything. And yet, in that moment, all rules dissolved beneath the tide. Audiences were stunned. The Hays Code was still in effect. And this scene pushed the line, not with nudity, but with emotional exposure. It was lust, yes, but also loneliness, betrayal, and years of being seen, but not truly touched. The chemistry between Lancaster and Kerr felt too vivid to be fiction. Rumors swirled for years that their on-screen intensity was rooted in something real. Neither actor confirmed it. They didn't have to. Off-camera, Kerr was navigating her own cracks in a carefully controlled image. Known for playing prim, polished women, she took this role, an adulterous, emotionally complex wife, to shatter that mold. Critics called it bold, Insiders whispered she was simply tired of pretending. Lancaster, meanwhile, was grappling with his own personal demons. He was magnetic and commanding. But those close to him said he struggled to reconcile his fame with his private frustrations. He was a perfectionist, and the pressure weighed heavily even when the cameras weren't rolling. And yet, somehow, in the middle of all that tension, they delivered a scene that still stops time. The ocean crashes. They cling to each other, and the world disappears. It was erotic, yes, but also aching, as if both characters knew their love couldn't last, and so they held it as fiercely as they could, if only for a moment. From Here to Eternity taught us that some romances aren't built to survive. They're built to be remembered. In wet sand, tangled limbs, and one kiss that dared to go too far. Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961. Audrey Hepburn and George Peppard. By 1961, Audrey Hepburn had become Hollywood's porcelain icon, poised, untouchable, and radiant in every frame. But Breakfast at Tiffany's revealed a crack in the veneer. It told the story of a woman who ran from everything, even love, until love refused to let her go. And in its final scene, drenched in rain and silence, that running finally stops. The moment unfolds, not in a glamorous Manhattan penthouse, but in a grimy alley. Holly Golightly, soaked to the bone, frantically searches for her nameless cat, the only creature she's ever let close. Behind her, Paul stands still, heartbreaking quietly. When she finds the cat, trembling and wet beneath a trash bin, the truth crashes in. Love isn't about fantasy. It's about choosing someone and letting them choose you back. No diamonds, no brunch at Tiffany's, just a woman, a man, and a shivering cat held tightly between them as they finally embrace. The scene may feel tender, but its legacy was laced with tension. George Peppard, then a rising star, reportedly clashed with director Blake Edwards and struggled to match Hepburn's feather-light gravity. Some claimed he was too stiff, too serious. Others said the issue ran deeper, that Peppard bristled at Hepburn's effortless stardom, the way the camera always loved her more. And behind Hepburn's luminous smile was a woman navigating real emotional exhaustion. Though adored on screen, she quietly battled burnout, a crumbling marriage, and the immense pressure of constantly embodying grace. She played Holly as brittle but bewitching, a woman who used beauty like a mask and charm like a shield. There's a scene earlier in the film where Holly whispers, "I'm like cat here. We belong to nobody." But by the end, when she clutches that cat with trembling hands, you can feel the shift. Belonging doesn't mean captivity. Sometimes it means safety. Breakfast at Tiffany's became a cultural touchstone, but that final kiss in the rain, it transcended the movie itself. Because when Hepburn leaned into Peppard beneath that downpour, it wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was a surrender, a moment where a broken woman let herself be loved, not as an image, but as a person. And that was the most romantic thing of all. Singin' in the Rain, 1952. Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds. In 1952, Hollywood was laughing at itself, and Singin' in the Rain handed it the mirror. A Technicolor's swirl of satire and joy, the film was a tribute to the chaos of cinema's transition from silent films to sound. But buried beneath the slapstick and spectacle was a single, intimate moment, a quiet stage, a flickering spotlight, and two dancers discovering something deeper than rhythm. They were falling in love, one step at a time. The scene begins in an empty soundstage. No applause, no audience, just Gene Kelly's Don Lockwood and Debbie Reynolds's Kathy Selden, bathed in golden studio light, as he leads her through a confession in the form of a song. You were meant for me. It's not just romantic, it's cinematic hypnosis. The lights dim and rise like breath, shadows stretch like longing, and the camera glides as if it, too, is swept off its feet. They don't need thunder or rain, just the silence of an empty set, and the growing realization that performance has turned into truth. But off camera, the mood was far colder. Gene Kelly, a perfectionist to the point of cruelty, reportedly pushed Debbie Reynolds, then just 19 and still new to film, to her breaking point. She later recalled crying under a piano between takes, comforted by none other than Fred Astaire. Kelly was demanding, sharp, and unrelenting. He wanted her to be brilliant, and he made her suffer for it. Years later, he admitted he was too hard on her. But in 1952, he showed no such softness. And yet, somehow, the chemistry bloomed anyway. Not because they liked each other, but because the dance required it. Every step, every gaze was choreographed, and somehow more honest than words could ever be. They moved like two people trying to memorize how the other feels, as if the floor might give out at any moment. Singin' in the Rain is remembered for its joy, but that stage scene, it's something else entirely. It's still, it's glowing. It's the kind of moment that makes you believe, even for just a few bars, that love might really be choreographed by fate. Because, in a world full of noise, that quiet dance said it all. She was meant for him, and he, maybe just for a moment, let himself believe it too. The Sound of Music, 1965, Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer. In 1965, as the world was learning to twist and shout, Hollywood delivered a love story rooted in silence, in stolen glances, measured footsteps, and the aching space between propriety and passion. The Sound of Music wasn't just a musical, it was a memory disguised as a fairy tale, and its most romantic moment didn't involve a kiss at all. Just a dance, one that changed everything. The scene unfolds during a grand party at the Von Trapp Villa. Maria, in soft blue, is helping young Kurt learn an Austrian folk dance called the Ländler. The captain watches from across the floor, arms crossed, jaw tense. Then he cuts in. The shift is subtle but seismic. Suddenly, the governess and the widowed naval officer are spinning together in slow, deliberate rhythm, their eyes locked more than their hands. It's not the dance that stirs the heart. It's the silence between them, the way she forgets the steps, the way he doesn't let her go. But that tension wasn't just in the script. Behind the scenes, Christopher Plummer famously dismissed the film as too sentimental, and he clashed frequently with the production. He later admitted he drank heavily during filming, not just from boredom, but from restlessness. Known for darker, more brooding roles, he struggled to find himself in Captain Von Trapp until that scene. Years later, he would call that moment with Julie Andrews as close to erotic as you could get on screen at the time. Andrews, ever the professional, carried the film's emotional core with a kind of luminous strength, but privately, she was still reeling from the whirlwind of Mary Poppins. The pressure to be perfect, to embody grace, wit, and innocence weighed heavily, and yet, in that scene, she let herself falter just enough. Her breath caught, her cheeks flushed. She played a woman realizing she might be in love with a man she's not supposed to want. Audiences didn't need a kiss to feel it. That dance said it all. In a room filled with music, their silence was deafening. Because sometimes love doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it glides across the floor, brushes your fingers, and leaves you wondering why your face feels hot. And just like that, the hills weren't the only thing alive with feeling. Now, Voyager, 1942, Bette Davis and Paul Henreid. In 1942, while the world was at war and Hollywood churned out patriotic dramas, now Voyager slipped in like a secret, a film about inner battles, quiet transformations, and the kind of love that doesn't end with a wedding, but with an ache. The moment arrives near the film's end. Bette Davis, no longer the repressed, trembling spinster, sits across from Paul Henreid, the man who helped her become someone else. The air is thick with everything left unsaid. They love each other, that's clear, but they can't be together. He's married, she's changed. The fantasy is ended. And yet, in the most famous line of her career, Davis looks at him with both grace and heartbreak and says, "Oh, Jerry, don't let's ask for the moon. We have the stars." It was a line that felt like a sigh, like learning how to live with almosts. Off-screen, the heartbreak ran deeper. Bette Davis was battling her own reputation. Fiercely intelligent and famously headstrong, she had just fought her way out of a brutal contract battle with Warner Brothers. She was labeled difficult, a word often reserved for women who knew their worth. Yet here, in Now, Voyager, she softened, not in talent, but in vulnerability. Her performance wasn't polished. It was raw, real, the kind of sorrow that doesn't need to shout. And Henried, the elegant Viennese actor, was a rising star. But behind the charm was tension. He was navigating the anti-German sentiment sweeping through Hollywood, all while trying to establish himself as more than just the man with a cigarette in each hand. The now iconic move from this very film. Rumors swirled that he and Davis didn't get along. Others said the opposite, that the tension on screen was too charged to be fiction. But none of that mattered when the cameras rolled. That final scene didn't need fireworks or violins, just the quiet dignity of two people who knew they had something rare, but not something forever. Now, Voyager wasn't about getting the guy. It was about finding yourself, even if it costs you the ending you dreamed of. And in a world obsessed with happy endings, this one gave us something braver, a woman who let go and still called it love. West Side Story, 1961, Natalie Wood and Richard Beymer. In 1961, America was divided by race, class, and a generation on the cusp of rebellion. And West Side Story didn't shy away from it. Wrapped in music and movement, it retold Romeo and Juliet through switchblades and alleyways, delivering one of the most emotionally devastating love stories ever captured on screen. The moment arrives in soft, dim light. Tony and Maria, surrounded by chaos and bloodshed, stand suspended in a world that no longer makes sense. After Tony confesses to killing her brother, Maria doesn't scream, she doesn't run. Instead, she touches his face, trembling, disbelieving, and asks the unthinkable, "Hold my hand and we're halfway there. Hold my hand and I'll take you there." Somehow, their duet, "Somewhere," is not a fantasy. It's a prayer, not for a happy ending, but for the impossible. A place where love isn't punished and difference isn't fatal. Behind the camera, the romance was far more fractured. Natalie Wood, cast as Maria, was a Russian-American actress playing a Puerto Rican teen, a controversial choice even then. She reportedly clashed with directors and fought to deliver emotional truth, while buried under a heavy accent and lip-synced vocals. Her real voice was dubbed. Her real emotions? Not so easily muted. Years later, Wood would reveal how deeply she identified with Maria's isolation. The need to be seen, the ache of loving something you're told you can't have. Richard Beymer, charming but often dismissed as too soft for the role of Tony, was caught between leading man expectations and a story that demanded something raw. Critics said he lacked heat, but what Beymer delivered was quiet tragedy. A boy trying to rewrite a life already written in blood. On set, he and Wood reportedly had little chemistry, but on screen, that distance only deepened the heartbreak. They looked like two people trying to hold on to something already slipping away. West Side Story was a musical, yes, but it wasn't cheerful. It was grief set to rhythm. And when Tony dies in Maria's arms, when she raises the gun not to kill but to prove she could, it wasn't just the end of a romance. It was the death of a dream, because sometimes love doesn't get somewhere. Sometimes it stays trapped between two gangs, two cultures, two breaths, and breaks your heart with how hard it tried. The Apartment, 1960. Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine. In 1960, Hollywood was still wearing its Sunday best. Tuxedos, cocktail dresses, studio-controlled smiles. But The Apartment cracked the illusion. Beneath its witty charm was a story about loneliness, compromise, and a love that came not with roses, but with resignation. The moment? It's New Year's Eve. Jack Lemmon's C.C. Baxter has finally walked away from his job and the morally bankrupt bosses who used his apartment like a motel. Meanwhile, Shirley MacLaine's Fran Kubelik, the elevator girl with sad eyes and an aching soul, realizes that the man she truly wants isn't the one with power, but the one with integrity. She runs through the night to Baxter's apartment, heart pounding, champagne bottle in hand. He opens the door, no speech, no grand gesture, just her smile. And then her line, "Shut up and deal." A joke, yes, but it lands with the weight of a promise. Behind that moment was a different kind of heartbreak. MacLaine was at the height of her career, confident, luminous, but exhausted. Years later, she admitted to carrying the emotional weight of Fran like a stone in her chest. Fran isn't glamorous. She's vulnerable. She's a woman who fell for a married man and nearly lost herself in the process. MacLaine made her feel real, not polished, but bruised and trying. Lemmon, meanwhile, was still proving he could play more than just the comic relief. His Baxter was all nerves and heart, the kind of man who waits too long to speak up but never stops hoping for something better. Off-screen, Lemmon struggled with the pressure of being the nice guy in a cutthroat industry. Friends said he had a laugh that could fill a room, and silences that lingered just as long. Director Billy Wilder crafted the entire film like a balancing act, sweet and bitter, funny and tragic. And that final moment, no kiss, no swelling score, was its perfect payoff. Two broken people sitting in a room, choosing each other not because it's easy, but because it's honest. The apartment reminded audiences that real love doesn't always knock you over. Sometimes it just pulls up a chair, and when it does, you deal. Not because life is perfect, but because you finally found someone who sees you in the wreckage and stays. An American in Paris, 1951, Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron. In 1951, as America leaned into post-war optimism, Hollywood gave audiences a Technicolor fantasy. But An American in Paris wasn't just escapism. It was art. It was longing. And at the heart of it was a love story told not in dialogue, but in the language of movement, light, and unspoken truth. The moment arrives in the film's final ballet, a wordless 17-minute sequence set against shifting backdrops of painted Parisian streets. Gene Kelly's Jerry Mulligan, a struggling American painter, imagines his lost love, Lisa, everywhere, in fountains, in shadowed corridors, in the swirl of red silk and the flicker of a gas lamp. Leslie Caron, just 19 at the time, moves like a dream he can't let go of. The world blurs around them as they dance through heartbreak, memory, and a hope that maybe, just maybe, love can survive reality. But that beauty came with tension. Off-screen, Gene Kelly was nearing the peak of his power. Beloved by audiences, feared by collaborators, he was brilliant but demanding, known for pushing co-stars to the brink in pursuit of perfection. Caron, fresh from ballet and still learning English, was caught between admiration and exhaustion. She later described Kelly as both a mentor and a taskmaster. Their chemistry on screen earned the hard way, through bruised feet, long days, and countless retakes. And yet, that tension became its own kind of intimacy. They weren't lovers, but on screen, they moved like people who needed each other, not for comfort, but for survival. The ballet wasn't just a flourish. It was a risk. No plot, no dialogue, just feeling. And it worked. The film went on to win Best Picture, and that sequence became one of the most celebrated visual expressions of romantic yearning in cinema history. An American in Paris reminded audiences that some love stories don't end with a kiss or a vow. Sometimes they end with two people spinning through a dream, too beautiful to be real, too unforgettable to let go. And in that silent swirl of color and music, Jerry didn't get the girl, but for a few perfect minutes, he got to remember what it felt like to love her. The King and I, 1956, Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr. In 1956, at the height of Hollywood's golden age, The King and I delivered something rare, a romance that never needed a kiss to feel intimate. It was a story about control and compromise, respect and resistance, and at its center stood two titans, a king who commanded a kingdom and a woman who refused to kneel. The moment comes with music. The palace is bathed in candlelight. Anna, the English schoolteacher, is trying to teach the King of Siam Western etiquette and ends up teaching him how to dance. He extends his hand. She hesitates. Then they glide. With each step, their eyes linger just a moment too long. Their bodies never fully touch, but the space between them hums. It's a waltz, but it's also a negotiation, a test of wills disguised as a duet. By the time it ends, they are breathless, not from the dance, but from everything it's awakened. Off-screen, the electricity between Yul Brynner and Deborah Kerr was just as palpable and just as complicated. Brynner, already a Broadway legend in the role, was known for his intensity and ego. He was magnetic, commanding but controlling. Kerr, cool and refined, didn't yield easily. The tension was real, and it gave the film its fire. Though they were never romantically involved, audiences felt something deeper than flirtation. They felt power shifting between two people who couldn't and wouldn't look away. Kerr was already a celebrated actress, but this role allowed her to tap into something regal yet quietly vulnerable. Brynner, meanwhile, had spent years embodying this king, but it came at a cost. Many in the industry whispered that he couldn't fully escape the role, that it consumed his identity, making every other part feel smaller by comparison. His portrayal was so iconic that he reprised it over 4,600 times in his career. Yet even he admitted, late in life, that it was Anna, not the king, who softened the audience's heart. The King and I wasn't about falling in love. It was about what happens when two people meet as equals and choose not to conquer one another. Because sometimes romance isn't a confession or a kiss. Sometimes it's a single dance where neither person yields and both are changed forever. The Best Years of Our Lives, 1946. Harold Russell and Cathy O'Donnell. In 1946, just 1 year after World War II ended, the Best Years of Our Lives dared to show the country what homecoming really looked like. Not parades and fanfare, but quiet heartbreak and fragile hope. And at the center of it all was a real-life veteran with no acting experience and a love story that stunned audiences into silence. The moment comes late in the film. Homer Parrish, played by Harold Russell, stands in his childhood bedroom, stripped of pretense. He's showing Wilma, the woman who still loves him, how he takes off his prosthetic hooks at night. It's not a romantic gesture, it's a warning. He believes no one could love what war left behind, but she doesn't flinch. She sees the man, not the wounds. Then she pulls the blanket over him with tenderness, so gentle the whole world felt it. Off-screen, the courage was just as real. Harold Russell wasn't an actor. He was a U.S. Army paratrooper who lost both hands in a training accident. When director William Wyler cast him, some studio execs pushed back. But Wyler insisted. America needed to see this. Russell would go on to win 2 Academy Awards for the same role, Best Supporting Actor, and a special honorary Oscar for bringing hope and courage to his fellow veterans. And Cathy O'Donnell? She was new to Hollywood, soft-spoken and effortlessly sincere. Her chemistry with Russell wasn't built on off-screen romance. It was built on mutual respect. She played Wilma with quiet steel, giving Russell the space to shine while grounding their scenes in deep emotional realism. In the years that followed, Cathy's career stayed modest, and she passed away far too young, at just 46. But this moment, her voice trembling with love, her hands never shaking, remains her legacy. The Best Years of Our Lives wasn't glossy. It didn't hide the scars or polish the pain. It gave America a mirror and showed that love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about staying, even when the lights are off, even when the hands can't hold, even when the war comes home, and someone still chooses you anyway. Sabrina, 1954, Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. In 1954, Hollywood crowned a new kind of Cinderella. But behind the fairy tale, a chauffeur's daughter, two wealthy brothers, and a love triangle dressed in Givenchy, Sabrina was anything but a fairy tale behind the scenes. The scene everyone remembers doesn't take place at a ball. It's quieter. Sabrina and Linus, played by Audrey Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart, are alone in a high-rise office. The city lights flicker below them, but it's her gaze, open, uncertain, and his silence that says everything. She asks if it's all been a lie. He doesn't answer right away, because even the sharpest men can get lost when they start feeling something real. On screen, it works, barely, but off-screen, it nearly didn't happen at all. Bogart didn't want Hepburn. He wanted Lauren Bacall, his real-life partner, and wasn't shy about it. He reportedly called Hepburn inexperienced, resented her closeness with director Billy Wilder, and clashed constantly with co-star William Holden. Hepburn, in turn, kept her distance, maintaining grace even as Bogart allegedly froze her out between takes. The irony, their lack of chemistry became the chemistry. Linus wasn't supposed to sweep Sabrina off her feet with charm. He was the older, colder brother, reserved, calculated, and in a strange twist of fate, Bogart's discomfort read as smoldering distance. It made the final scene, when he shows up, suitcase in hand, to meet her on that ocean liner, feel earned, risky, real. Behind those final frames, though, everyone walked away changed. Audrey had already fallen for William Holden during filming, a whirlwind that ended in heartbreak when she learned he couldn't give her the family she dreamed of. Bogart, for all his brilliance, left the set disliked by nearly everyone. And yet Sabrina became a cultural icon, a masterclass in restraint, elegance, and longing. Sometimes love stories aren't about heat, they're about timing, about two people standing on opposite ends of a life they almost had, and choosing, for once, to meet in the middle. Sabrina isn't the story of a girl choosing the right man. It's the story of a man learning, too late, what it costs to love someone who's already learned to love herself. Brief encounter. 1945. Celia Johnson and Trevor Howard. It begins with a train whistle. Sharp, sudden, final. In 1945, Brief Encounter offered a kind of love story that didn't end in kisses, but in silence and sacrifice. Shot in black and white, just as Britain was emerging from war, the film felt like a mirror held up to a world still aching. Celia Johnson plays Laura, a married woman with a quiet life and a dependable husband. Trevor Howard is Alec, a doctor she meets by chance in a train station tea room. What follows isn't scandalous in action, but devastating in emotion. And the moment that haunts viewers most, that final goodbye. No music swells, no declarations, just a hand placed gently on her shoulder, then gone. Their last moment is stolen, interrupted by the return of her chatty friend, who never notices the devastation simmering beneath Laura's still face. That was Brief Encounter's genius. Heartbreak unfolding not in fireworks, but in the tightening of a throat, the trembling of a lip. Behind the camera, the film carried its own kind of quiet drama. Celia Johnson had nearly turned down the role. She was wary of stepping away from her children and uncertain if a story about emotional infidelity would be accepted by wartime audiences. But it was that very restraint, her ability to convey entire paragraphs of longing with a single look, that made her unforgettable. Trevor Howard, still relatively unknown, gave Alec a tenderness rarely afforded to male leads of the era. Together, they created something deeply British, deeply human, and oddly subversive. There were whispers, of course. Some claimed Howard's off-screen life was far less noble, that he struggled with personal demons and tension simmered between him and the more reserved Johnson. But whatever friction existed, it only deepened the emotional charge. Their scenes don't sparkle, they ache. Brief Encounter wasn't just about an affair that never happened. It was about all the lives we almost lived, about choices we make not because we want to, but because they let us live with ourselves in the morning. And in that final shot, as the train pulls away and the tea room empties, we're reminded that sometimes the most powerful love stories are the ones we never finish. The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938. Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. He swung in like a blaze of technicolor, all green tights and golden grin. But behind Errol Flynn's boyish swagger was a man Hollywood could never quite contain. In 1938, The Adventures of Robin Hood burst onto screens with a vibrancy audiences had never seen. Warner Brothers spared no expense, pushing the limits of early color film to give Depression-era viewers something magical. And they found their fairy tale in the pairing of Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. He was the reckless outlaw with charm to spare. She was Lady Marian, noble, composed, and impossible not to fall for. Together, they lit up the screen with a chemistry that felt too real to be scripted. Their most poignant moment? Not the sword fights or galloping rescues, but that tender, candlelit scene in the garden, where Robin vows to return to her. His voice softens, hers wavers, and the laughter fades into something quiet, something aching. It was romance, not just played, but felt, and the audience knew it. Off-screen, though, the story was far more complicated. Rumors swirled that Flynn was as wild behind the scenes as he was in Sherwood Forest. While de Havilland maintained a public grace, insiders whispered that she grew increasingly wary of Flynn's off-camera antics, particularly his alleged drinking and womanizing. Studio insiders loved the pairing, but Olivia didn't love being treated like an accessory to his myth. And she certainly didn't love the studio contract that kept her locked in place while Flynn got all the glory. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, the fairy tale had begun to fray. Flynn's reputation darkened, not just because of personal scandals, but because the public began to see the cracks in his golden armor. Olivia, meanwhile, fought back. She famously sued Warner Brothers to break free of her contract, a move that changed Hollywood law forever and earned her the industry's respect. But it also meant stepping away from the fantasy she'd helped create. Looking back, that garden scene between Robin and Marian feels almost cruel. Two actors suspended in eternal youth, whispering promises neither of them could keep. One chasing freedom with too much fire, the other chasing truth, no matter the cost. And maybe that's the real story behind Robin Hood. Not just stolen riches, but stolen time, a fleeting golden spark between two stars who could never quite meet again in the light. They danced, they kissed, they parted. Some on screen, some forever. But for a generation raised on flickering reels and whispered promises, these moments still echo. If even one scene brought back a memory, stirred a feeling, or made you miss someone, don't let it fade. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more, because some love stories deserve to be remembered again and again.